Senator Cruz, you and Mike Lee and Rand Paul, who I believe is the trifecta right now. You guys wrote a letter to Harry Reid, and you said any attempt to infringe on the Second Amendment will be met with any procedural means necessary to stop it in the Senate. First of all, I love you. Second of all, what do you mean by that?
Well, as you know, a lot of Senate Democrats are trying to exploit the tragedy that happened in Sandy Hook, and they're using it to push a radical anti-gun agenda. And it's an agenda that's inconsistent with the Second Amendment. And
no, they're looking. Hang on just a second, Senator. They're looking, and let me play devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. They are looking for common sense background checks to keep the guns out of the hands of the mentally unstable and criminals, keep them out of the hands of criminals. Why is a background check something that is not reasonable?
Well, that's a great question, and let's break down the different things they're proposing, because they actually fall into one of two categories. Some of what they're proposing are essentially show legislation. They are bills, for example, much of the assault weapons ban that Dianne Feinstein has been pushing. We had an assault weapons ban in place for a decade, and 3 times the Department of Justice paid for studies of that assault weapons ban, and 3 times the 3 different studies concluded that there was no evidence to show that it had any effect whatsoever on crime. So that's what the data conclusively indicates. So what do they want to do immediately after this tragedy? Pass a law that the data showed did zero, nada, nothing to stop violent crime.
Okay, so show legislation.
Right, that's a part of it. The other part, and it's where you focused right now, is what they call universal background checks. Now, my view in terms of how we should approach gun legislation is that gun legislation shouldn't be gun legislation. It should be crime legislation. We should focus our deterrence and our punishment on violent criminals, and we shouldn't be taking away the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. Now, we right now have a background check. If you or I go to a gun store, if you or I go to Walmart and buy a shotgun or a rifle or a handgun, we have to fill out a form and go through a federal background check. That's been the law for a long time. Right now, the Obama administration is not effectively enforcing that law, and I want to talk about that in a minute because the facts are important. Actually, let's talk about that right now. In 2010, there were roughly 15,000 felons and fugitives who tried to illegally purchase a gun. 15,000. Of those 15,000, the Obama Justice Department prosecuted 44 of them. I mean, those numbers are really staggering. Out of 15,000 felons and fugitives who in 2010 tried to purchase a gun, the Obama administration prosecuted only 44. And we had several hearings in front of the Judiciary Committee. Remember one in particular where a police chief began screaming at a senator saying, "We don't have time to waste on paperwork offenses." Now, to my mind, if a felon is trying to illegally purchase a gun, that's not a paperwork offense. We should be very concerned why that felon wants a gun. Rather than devote resources, energy, make it a priority to prosecute these felons and fugitives who are trying to buy guns, what the Obama administration instead is doing is pushing what they call universal background checks, which would extend the background check to every single private transaction between law-abiding citizens. If you and I go duck hunting, we're glad you're now at Texan. If you and I go duck hunting together in Texas, and we're sitting in the duck blind, and you look over and say, "Hey, that's a good-looking shotgun," and I offer to sell it to you, that law would require I wouldn't be able to sell it to you. I'd have to go through a federal background check to check you before we could do that. And what the Department of Justice has told the Judiciary Committee is the only way you could implement their so-called universal background checks is for the federal government to compile a registry, a list of every firearm owned in private possession today in the United States. And I think a registry is very, very dangerous. It has historically in other countries over and over again.
Why? Explain it.
The precondition to confiscation. That's how the government
take your
guns.
That sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Well, it's the simple facts that when the government has the lists of your guns, it then can go and take your guns. And, you don't have to hypothesize. You look at the lead author of the assault weapons ban, Dianne Feinstein. She has said that she would like to say, and this is a quote or very near a quote, she would like to say, quote, Mr. America, Mrs. America, I want to take your guns. I want to. She has said on the record, if she could, she would come into our homes and take. She was talking about what she calls assault weapons.
So let me go.
She's admitted that her ultimate goal is confiscation.
I know that. Now let me again play devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. But Senator, they already have a list of the guns because everybody gets a background check, so they know who has guns.
Well, but they don't, because under current law, they have to destroy those records after the background check is completed. So part of how the current system got passed was a requirement that records not be kept, that they simply run the check at the time at the point of sale, and then they destroy the record.
Have you seen that big, huge building they're building in Utah? Because I'm sure they're destroying a lot of information. Right.
Now, that one I'm not going to get into right now.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay.
Senator, couldn't they do this on the state level, though? I mean, I lived in Pennsylvania and a mile away from the Jersey border, and Pennsylvania has more lenient laws, and I would be petrified to take a gun into New Jersey because I know their laws would be tougher. I mean, why do we need a federal database if Mississippi wants to have different laws than New York does? Why can't they just do it on the state level?
I think almost anything would be better on the state level than the federal level. But the great thing about 1791, other than egg salad,
that egg salad amendment was a very important day. Don't belittle that. But go ahead.
Was the Bill of Rights protects all of us, and the states can't take away our Second Amendment rights any more than the federal government can. We had two major decisions in the U.S. Supreme Court in the last decade. The first was Heller, which I played an active part in litigating. I represented 31 states in the Heller case, where together with Mr. Heller, the lead litigant, we won a landmark 5-4 decision that held that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms that the federal government cannot take away. And then the follow-up to that was the McDonald case that struck down Chicago's gun ban, and it said the states and local governments are bound by the very same protections of the Second Amendment that the federal government is. So if a registry is unconstitutional for the federal government, I think it's also unconstitutional for the state.